A wild week 1 is in the books, and there's a lot that just happened. Did you pick up on that sneaky RB's usage? And how about the rookies who actually mattered week 1? Well, I spent 7 hours recapping this slate, and I have some key takeaways. These are 13 players you should consider adding before your buddies do. So the rookie Puka Nikolau for the Rams, 5th round pick, he broke out week 1 in a major way. I mean, check this out. The dude had 10 catches, 15 targets. He had over 115 receiving yards. I mean, this reminds you of what? Cooper Kupp. And those 15 targets were obviously amazing anytime you get 15 targets, but it led every single wide receiver on the week. Matthew Stafford found himself his guy. Nikolau earned a target on 43% of his routes, the highest of any receiver on the week. And now check this out. This fellow was slept on in the pre-draft process. I mean, he went in the 5th round, but look at this. This was something I tweeted back in July during the summer. He was the #1 wide receiver last year in college football in efficiency. His yards per route run, #1 graded PFF wide receiver amongst qualifying players, and only 3 drops. He was a stud who fell in drafts for other reasons, of course, but this is somebody you want to add because this production can clearly be sustained. When you're getting that many targets per route, it means you're getting open. This is the type of production we're talking about. Jamar Chase was the last rookie in his debut to have 100+ yards, and you can see what JB Long posts here. The other guys that you can kind of think about in this, TJ Hawkinson, Terry McLaurin, AJ Brown, dudes that are elite receivers still. It means you're really good if you come right into the NFL and dominate. And the good news for Nikolau is that Cooper Kupp's going to miss at least 3 more games, and based on all the reports, this thing with Kupp might be really serious. It also helps Puka that Matthew Stafford returned from injury. He had 3 separate injuries bothering him last year, and it looked like vintage Matthew Stafford, completing over 60% of his passes, 300+ yards. He looked good. He looked in rhythm. He looked like he had a connection with Puka. He definitely had more of a connection than the other competition Puka was dealing with here in Van Jefferson, who was not efficient last year, was not overly efficient in this game, leading the team in snaps and routes, and Ben Skowronek, who's basically a bigger tight end, only earned 2 targets in this game. So Puka is the #1 wide receiver ad, but let's move to the #1 running back ad. And it's the Eagles running back Kenneth Gainwell. Look, the Eagles told us all offseason what their plans were at the running back position, and a lot of people didn't believe them. This tweet I have is from early August. The reports were that Kenneth Gainwell was getting the most first team reps, and then the dude was actually rested in the first preseason game. And as I put here, a reminder, he was the #1 Eagles running back in the Super Bowl and also the entire playoffs, showing that they trusted him. And the Eagles also showed that they didn't really like Rashad Penny this camp in preseason, as he worked primarily with the 3rd team. There was rumors that he might get cut, and he didn't get cut, but basically the next closest thing is being a healthy scratch week 1, meaning they liked Boston Scott more than you, didn't want to have 4 running backs active, and you're the 4th running back on the depth chart, really close to being a practice squad player. Now, all of this led to Kenneth Gainwell seeing a career-high 62% of the snaps, which led to a pretty solid performance. 18 overall touches in this one for 74 yards. He had 46 of the Eagles' first 56 yards. In a game where the Eagles' offense really struggled, Kenneth Gainwell actually put up a solid performance of over 11 fantasy points. And just a reminder, the last time that this guy was a running back 1 for an entire season, which maybe is in the cards this year, at Memphis, he ends up putting up 2,000 total yards between his rushing and receiving and 50+ receptions. He is a dynamic weapon. He is apparently well ahead of Rashad Penny and DeAndre Swift on this depth chart. And through his first 2 seasons in the NFL, Gainwell is top 20 in yards per touch, and now he remains behind a top 5 offensive line. And oh yeah, one more thing, you can cut Rashad Penny from your team. Now the next running back who's interesting, and we really have to unpack this one, is Kyren Williams from the Rams, because Kyren Williams was a big surprise in week 1. And here's why. He actually led the backfield, 53 of 81 snaps for the Rams. That's 62% of the snaps. He was the running back 1, quote unquote, in this game. Now in week 1, he puts up a nice performance because, he had 17 fantasy points. It was because of the 2 touchdowns. 15 carries for 52 yards isn't all that crazy. And Cam Akers was still involved. 22 carries led the team, although he only played in this one 35% of the snaps, but he wasn't efficient either. 22 carries for 29 yards. Most of these carries, or at least a bulk of them, came in the 4th quarter. That's where he scored his touchdown, as well as they were running out the clock with Cam Akers. According to PFF, you can see the dark blue right here is Kyren Williams. The light blue is Cam Akers. According to PFF, this was Kyren Williams' job in the 2-minute offense and the 3rd down, which makes sense because Kyren Williams is known as a pass catcher coming out of college. This was a game without Cooper Kupp. Maybe they wanted just another weapon out there running more routes. And that is what we saw as Kyren Williams ran 29 routes in this game to Cam Akers running just 3. Now, Kyren is going to be a waiver ad, and we'll get to our takeaway in a second. But look, there's not a ton of upside, in my opinion, here behind this offensive line that is not that great. And look, this is a smaller back, 194 pounds. According to the player profiler workout metrics, he really has no speed. That's why he fell in the draft, last year's draft. He has no burst. This is not the most dynamic running back. But what he's known for is his pass protection in this right here, his ability to catch passes. He had 77 receptions as a starter through 24 games, which is very good for a college running back. He had over 1,400 yards in both of these seasons total, 13% target share, 11% target share at Notre Dame. These are elite receiving numbers, and maybe that's why they had him out there week 1. The Rams offense did look improved week 1, but the offensive line is still a big question mark, and I'm just not sold that this is going to be Kyren Williams' backfield now. But we can't ignore that he played right here again, 53 of 81 snaps, nearly 65% of the snaps. That can't be left on your waiver wire. So if Kenneth Gainwell is is gone and some of the other guys maybe that we'll talk about, I do think he's still worse than that, but just temper your expectations. Now, you don't got to temper your expectations for this next receiver, and that would be Nico Collins, a guy we were high on for most of the offseason, and he had a great week 1. As you can see from Alex Caruso's tweet right here, Nico Collins, in terms of players with 10 plus targets, he was one of them. He had 11 targets. This was before the 4 o'clock games, but he had 11 targets overall, which was great on 71% of the snaps. Collins earned a target on 28% of his routes, which would rank top 10 last year. And he wasn't just earning targets, he was actually producing. 14 fantasy points is solid for not scoring a touchdown. 6 catches for 80 yards. He was being used not just in the short and intermediate range in the slot, but also downfield, and that is key. As Sam Hoppin points out here, Nico Collins was 4th in week 1 amongst all players in air yards with 165, just right behind A.J. Brown. Now, what are air yards? It's your yards that are counted from the line of scrimmage to where the ball lands when you're running your routes. That means there's a lot of upside downfield. So not only did he see production, there was also upside on this production. Now, as we discussed in the offseason, Nico Collins was a great pick for you, whether it was around 10, 11, or 12 in your draft, because he saw increased efficiency last year despite ranking 99th in catchable targets. Davis Mills stunk. The offense was dead last, 32nd in the NFL, so we just needed a quarterback who can be somewhat accurate for him. And in week 1, that's kind of what we got. CJ Stroud definitely struggled. He missed some throws. He's a rookie. That's going to happen, but he completed over 60% of his passes. He looked better than Davis Mills did in most of the games, if not all of the games last year, and this is a good starting point for Nico Collins. As we discussed throughout the offseason, yeah, the Texans were bringing in players, drafting players, signing Robert Woods, signing Dalton Schultz, but none of these guys were a threat to Nico because none of them are just as dynamic. Robert Woods, an older player, he earned 10 targets, but they were not downfield. They were not as explosive after the catch. Noah Brown, mostly a run blocker, brought in. The rookies, Xavier Hutchinson didn't see run. John Mechie didn't play. Nathaniel Dell, I think he's talented, but he doesn't earn the same targets as the big body Nico Collins downfield. And at least for week 1, all of this panned out. As you can see right here from Teddy Football, the target shares for the Texans in week 1, Nico Collins led the way with 25%. Robert Woods, Bobby Trees, 23%. That is solid, but he didn't do a lot after the catch. Dalton Schultz, the new tight end who is supposed to be great. I think this is just a Dak Prescott thing because Dalton Schultz, not great after the catch, not great at getting open, just 4% of the targets in week 1. So Nico is one of these priority waiver wire ads as a clear wide receiver 1 on his team. And now this next guy might be a nice fill-in for a couple of weeks for you. And it is Allen Robinson, the 30-plus-year-old veteran. This man is back in our lives. And this is something that we saw towards the end of camp. Some, positive talk about Allen Robinson, which is always dangerous like it was last year. And there's one key reason why Allen Robinson is worth an ad, and that's because of Deontay Johnson's injury in week 1. And by the way, if you're finding this helpful, make sure to hit the subscribe button to see all my future content. Now, that injury for Deontay is somewhat significant. We'll find out throughout the week this week, but he ends up leaving the game in the end of the first half. He misses the whole game, and according to Sports MD Analysis on Twitter, this is a moderate severity hamstring, which is usually an average of 2 weeks, which means he's probably going to miss week 2, might miss week 3, and then we'll see what happens from there. Now, once Deontay Johnson left, this led to a massive second half for Allen Robinson. The fella only had 1 catch for like 2 yards in the first half, and then in the second half, he puts up 4 catches for over 60 yards. He ends up having 8 targets, which led the Pittsburgh Steelers ahead of George Pickens, ahead of Pat Freiermuth, who also got banged up but came back in. It was Allen Robinson as the main option. But the best news out of any of this was that Allen Robinson was operating out of the slot as the primary slot receiver, and this is great for aging veterans who know how to get open. It's easier to get open in the slot. You have more of the field to play with. As I mentioned, he ended up earning 8 targets. Now, this was only 18% of the total targets. They threw 45 times. He earned 8 of them, so 8 divided by 45, that's 18%. But in this game, as you can see right here, Deontay Johnson in the first half did see 6 targets. So that's 13% of the targets that'll go around, meaning that there's a decent chance Allen Robinson for at least the next 1 to 2 plus weeks, even if Deontay returns, maybe if he starts getting hot, he could see 20+% of the targets. Again, this is not a priority ad compared to the other wide receivers we've already talked about, but if you're in a deeper league, a 12-man league, a deep bench league, whatever it might be, he's definitely worth taking. And there's similar analysis at the running back position with this potential ad for you, and it's Roschon Johnson, the rookie. He's somebody you want to grab and hold. You're not going to play him right away, but he's somebody you want on your roster. Because in week 1, Roschon actually led this backfield by playing 29 snaps out of 74. That's 39%. But as you can see with Khalil Herbert and Deontay Foreman here, everybody was involved. This was kind of a nasty 3-headed backfield. But Roschon ran the most routes, and he actually led the entire team with 7 targets in this game. And Chicago rewarded him after a nice catch and run to get down to the goal line. He got a 2-yard touchdown. He earned that touch over Foreman, the bigger back. So Roschon was the main third down and passing down back, and this is something that we kind of talked about. Nobody wanted to pay attention to it because everybody fell in love with Herbert, as did I after the first preseason game or 2 when he was rested. But in the third one, he lost the third down work to Roschon, and this was expected because Roschon was the best pass protector and pass catcher apparently in camp. And according to Pro Football Focus, the dark green right here is Roschon. This continued in week 1. He saw the most 2-minute drill snaps, and he saw by far the most third down snaps, 6 snaps compared to just 3 for Herbert and none for Deontay Foreman. Now look, Roschon was Bijan Robinson's backup in college, and even despite that, even despite being behind one of the best prospects, he still got taken in the 4th round of drafts because he was quietly number 1 the past 2 years of college football across those years in yards created after contact, so he can break tackles. And the fella produced nearly 6 yards per touch last year in college. So in deeper formats or really just 12-team leagues where you have a bench spot, just hold on to him and see what happens here. And you definitely want to pick up Tyler Algier, who apparently is available in like 70% of fantasy leagues, which makes sense if you're in like a 10-man league, but at this point he needs to be added. Because in week 1, Algier played 28 of 51 snaps, over 50% of the snaps. They had Bijan on the field often with Algier, whether both were in the backfield or Bijan was lining up a good amount of the time as a wide receiver. And this led to a nice week 1 performance for Algier, where he had 18 total touches. He puts up nearly 100 yards. He's averaging in this one over 5 yards per touch. And this is where he picked up where he left off basically last year. Because last season, over the final 4 games of the year, Tyler Algier was a top 5 fantasy running back, up there with the names of Austin Eckler and Christian McCaffrey, as you can see right here. And basically week 1 proved a quote that we got in the preseason correct. Algier will be heavily used despite Bijan being in Atlanta. And now here's the deal. Atlanta's not a great team overall. They might not be close in a lot of their games, giving Algier the chance to see 18 opportunities. And also Drake London and Kyle Pitts aren't going to combine for just 2 catches every game. And then yeah, there's top 10 pick Bijan Robinson, who in his debut in the NFL had a nice game. He had 16 touches for over 80 yards, a touchdown, and those 10 carries on the ground that you can see right here, those are definitely going to go up for a bigger back. Bijan in his debut saw the majority of the third downs. He is the blue right here in these pie charts. He saw every single 2-minute drill, but he didn't see any goal line work. It was actually Algier who saw 2 out of the 3 goal line carries, but that's something that's probably not going to hold up throughout the season, as Bijan is a big back and was great in the goal line and red zone at Texas. Takeaway I have is that Algier is great. If you have him on your team, awesome, but there's probably a window right now to actually sell Algier, as people might think that he's the lead back here. He's going to continue to see 18 touches a week, where that's probably not true since Bijan is there. Now, another wide receiver that's worth considering is another Ram here, and it's Tutu Atwell, who's somebody who's been in the league a couple years, but he's had a tough start to his career. That all ended week 1, where he took full advantage of his opportunities. In this game, Atwell had 8 targets. He went over 100 yards. He had 6 catches, and the third-year player finally had his big breakout performance. He ended up earning 22% of the targets, only behind Puka Nikolau, and he played almost 80% of the snaps. Now, Tutu Atwell is only like 155 pounds. He's known as a downfield deep receiver, and we saw this week 1. He was 10th in air yards with 117 air yards, so this kind of makes him like a boom or bust option, not as reliable as, say, his teammate Puka Nikolau. But it was good to see him pay off week 1, because the Rams treated him like a priority in the offense all preseason. He rested in every game with the starters. And like I said, the start to his career has been rough. As a rookie, he had a shoulder strain. He dealt with some injuries in the preseason, so his rookie year was a wash. And then last year, they brought in Allen Robinson, who basically buried him down the depth chart because Van Jefferson was there, and Tutu just never really had a chance. And now there's no Robinson. Now there's no Cooper Kupp as well with injury, so it's Tutu Atwell who's out there. I prefer Puka Nikolau. I prefer Nico Collins, but if you're in a deeper league, add him and see what happens. Now, this next situation takes us to the Ravens backfield, where if you haven't heard, J.K. Dobbins is going to miss the entire year with an Achilles. And by the way, this is just brutal. This guy had a multi-ligament knee injury. He recovered. It took him like 1.5 years to recover from that. He's finally healthy, and then goes out there and tears his ACL. And oh yeah, or tears his Achilles. And by the way, he never got paid. He tried to get paid this preseason by holding out, never got paid, and this might be a career-ending injury. So I hope the best for J.K. Dobbins. I see people just saying, oh, he's so injury-prone, all this, like laughing at the dude. I mean, this is a pretty brutal situation in terms of real life. But now we're left for fantasy to be like, hey, who would we pick up here? Like, as if that really matters. But of course, as sicko fantasy players in this context of why you're watching this video, it does matter in this realm. So people start to look at Gus Edwards and Justice Hill. Well, what happened after J.K. Dobbins got hurt? Well, according to Pro Football Focus, here's the snap count. You can see that Justice Hill is basically a split. Sees 19 snaps, Gus Edwards 15. Edwards got actually the first snap after J.K. Dobbins in this game, but Justice Hill was involved throughout the entire game, not just when Dobbins got hurt, also in the first quarter. And where Hill was involved the most was as a pass catcher. He's the light green here. He saw 7 of potential 10 third down snaps. 3 of these snaps were actually J.K. Dobbins, who won't be there moving forward. And Hill did see 2 out of 4 goal line touches, which I don't know if that'll be consistent, but they did put him in there over J.K. Dobbins and then over Gus Edwards at 2 different points in this game. And for what it's worth, Justice Hill was gaining traction and actually seemed to have passed Gus Edwards on the depth chart this preseason in camp, because he fits his new offensive coordinator, Tom Monken's offense better. Monken is a past-first coordinator who wanted to get J.K. Dobbins involved in the passing game more, and now Justice Hill fits that mold. But look, if we're being completely honest here, none of these guys are going to win you your league. They still have Melvin Gordon on the practice squad, and you could be sure that he's going to be called up. They have Keontae Mitchell, a rookie who's currently on the, I think, PUP, or maybe he's on IR. He'll be back in a couple of weeks, and they can go out there and add a Kareem Hunt. They can add a Leonard Fournette, who might be the actual better options to be adding in terms of upside to get the majority of the touches in this backfield. Either way, you should probably just add Kareem Hunt. He might be a starter here. He might be a starter for the Colts at some point in a couple of weeks or days or hours, so he's just worth adding. If I had to pick a Ravens running back, it would be Justice Hill, but I'm not wasting a priority waiver or a lot of money on my fab budget here. And if you want to see exactly who the priorities every single week are on the waivers at every single position, well, if you want to win your league as well, like this says, this is where the fantasy blueprint comes into play. Quite simply, it has all the tools you need every single week to win your league, and stuff is going to come out every day. Monday, the waiver wire tools. Tuesday, the key stats database. Wednesday, the rest of season rankings for trades, whatever it might help you with. Thursday, projections and rankings, and Friday, the game by game notes. And if you're wondering, what are the game by game notes? They are an insane resource. Every single game for every single starter, I basically put out here the best matchups you can find when it comes to pass protection, quarterback, wide receivers, defensive line, offensive lines, whatever it might be. They're in here for every single game and every single meaningful player. Now, the fantasy blueprint is very simple to get. You just scan the QR code on the screen or click the link in the description below and follow the 2 simple steps. And like I said, I'm sending material your way every single day. And what does it cost you? It costs you $5 for the entire season, not just per week. The entire season, it costs you $5. And if you don't make your fantasy playoffs, I'll refund that $5. You get all those tools every single day sent your way. It's the best offer in the industry. So like I said, take 2 seconds, join the thousands of people already using the blueprint, and scan the QR code on the screen or click the link in the description below now. We now move to Carolina with the players you need to add. And in week 1, Adam Thielen did not lead this team in overall targets and usage. DJ Shark did not either. He was out. Terrace Marshall, a surprise play. He didn't. Well, was it the rookie Jonathan Mingo? No, it wasn't him as well. It was the veteran tight end Hayden Hurst. And oh, who could have seen this one coming? Well, if you paid attention to the camp reports and preseason reports, as we posted back in August, mid-August here, Hayden Hurst, he was running around on 100% of the preseason snaps. He was reportedly Bryce Young's favorite target in camp, and we saw this week 1. Hurst led the Panthers, earning a 24% target share, leading to 7 targets. Now, ideally, we would have saw more snaps and routes run, but this was a good start for his week 1 usage. And speaking of good week 1 usage for tight ends, look at Luke Musgrave from the Packers right here. Look at this number right here, 23 routes. He ran the most routes of any player on this team. 85% of the Packers routes he was running out there. And now this led to him having 50 receiving yards on 4 targets, but it could have been a much better day for Musgrave. He was overthrown wide open on a deep crosser earlier in the game by Love, and then look at this right here. He makes this reception late in the game for a big gain, but look at this. There's nobody around him for him to fall into the end zone. It's kind of a tough catch wide open. Not the best throw, but Jordan Love was off his back foot. Can't blame him. And then he stumbles and falls like at the 5-yard line. This would have easily been a touchdown. There's a world here where Luke Musgrave would have had 100 yards and maybe multiple touchdowns in this game, and then you never would have been able to add him because everybody on your waivers and in your league would have went and got him. And check this out. He led all tight ends on just 4 targets and air yards. His downfield usage, his role is elite. He's running routes. He's leading the team as the de facto wide receiver 1 in week 1, seeing downfield usage, and he's a stud athlete, the 3rd best athlete in this draft class. Everything looked good for Musgrave, who led the Packers skill position players with 46 snaps, 75% of the snaps. And not only was it 75% of the snaps, 85% of the routes, like we mentioned earlier. The average tight end who sees that finishes as a top 10 fantasy tight end, and he's probably on your waiver wire because he's out there in over 80% of leagues. The simple analysis here is add Musgrave before he breaks out. And then believe it or not, in Tennessee, the number 1 running back in terms of snaps was Tajae Spears, not Derrick Henry, and Derrick Henry was not injured in this game. Tajae Spears played 34 of 63 snaps. That's 54% of the snaps here. Now, this only led to 7 opportunities, his carries and targets, compared to 17 for Derrick Henry, but it's definitely worth noting. Because as Warren Sharp points out here, Tajae Spears had a great preseason. He led every single running back in yards after contact per rush. He was great at breaking tackles, and this is something that made him the clear running back 2 on the team. But nobody really saw it coming that he would see a 50-50 snap split in week 1. And now I don't think this means he's a immediate threat to Derrick Henry, but it means that the Titans definitely love him and definitely trust him. According to Pro Football Focus, this dark green right here is Tajae Spears. He saw the only 2-minute drill snap over Derrick Henry and 11 of 13 third down snaps. So he's the clear third down back, but he was also earning some early down work. And look, there's no question this kid is talented. His last year in college, look at this. Between his rushing yards and receiving yards, he had over 1,800 total yards. He had 125 more yards in his final 8 college games and averaged over 7 yards per touch. Those are all elite stats. So he's a sneaky ad, honestly, in all formats. If something happens to Derrick Henry, he's going to be an every down player. And right now, he's a 50-50 player. Now, another sneaky running back ad that's in even deeper leagues would be somebody like Chuba Hubbard. And we have to talk about this because it is worth a look. In week 1, Miles Sanders did see 22 opportunities, 18 carries, 4 targets for the Panthers. And by all accounts, that makes him the running back 1. But look at this. The snaps weren't all that great for Sanders. 44 of 77 snaps. That's just 57% of the snaps. Hubbard saw nearly 40% of the snaps in this game. That's much more than the 3-down role we were promised for Sanders. He barely saw over 55% of the snaps. And in this game, Chuba Hubbard was the 3rd down back. It wasn't like he saw the majority of the touches. No, this light blue right here is Chuba Hubbard. He saw all 8 out of 8 third down snaps. That's 100%. Miles Sanders was not a 3-down back in this game. Chuba Hubbard had a role on 3rd downs and even some early down usage. And this is good for Chuba Hubbard, who was also great last year. He ranked 6th in yards per touch, ahead of Austin Eckler in 2022. And Hubbard is still just 24 years old and was an elite college producer. I mean, the last time he saw a full workload, look at this. He had over 2,200 total yards between his rushing and receiving in college. And for what it's worth, Miles Sanders is often injured. Through his first 3 seasons, he had 9 injuries. He had an injury this preseason, a groin, so maybe he was limited because of that. But either way, way, it's worth noting that Chuba Hubbard is somebody that in deeper leagues you definitely want to be stashing. And now there was one thing that I did not expect to see week 1, probably the most out of anything, even the Puka Nikolau stuff. And it was that Zach Ertz, as you can see my tweet here, this is how I was surprised looking at this, had a triple look that it didn't say 0. No, it was 10 targets for Zach Ertz week 1. And the reason this was so surprising was because Zach Ertz last year, when he was 32 years old, tore his MCL and ACL as a tight end. This usually, if it doesn't end your career, you're probably missing at least close to a year. And he came back for week 1. And there was questions on if he would play week 1. He was questionable, but he ended up playing and he looked good. Because check this out. He ran 32 of a possible 35 routes. This was tied for the team high with Marquise Brown and Michael Wilson. He was an every down player running 91% of the routes. 91% is a number that only like Travis Kelce and Mark Andrews hit at the tight end position. Now, of course, this team is not that great. His quarterback is Josh Dobbs, so it didn't lead to a good stat line. 6 catches for 21 yards on 10 targets. But if he's healthy, he is somebody that you want. Can't be on your waivers by any means with this usage. And a reminder, last season when he was healthy, he was the number 6 tight end in fantasy points per game with multiple different quarterbacks. He can get it done no matter who his quarterback is. He is a mismatch, basically, an athletic mismatch when healthy. So these are the 13 players you want to add before week 2 begins. Go out and get them right now. There's going to be more content dropping throughout the week, and a trades video will be coming out on Tuesday that you need to check out right here once it releases. And if you made it all the way through the video, hit the subscribe button. It helps this channel grow, but it helps you see my future content so you can schmack around your buddies.